The top and the password at the bottom.
Okay.
You're welcome.
Okay, this is the January 22nd meeting of the Public Records Advisory Council, 1:30 p.m. here at the State Archives building. Do we have anyone on the phone?
Yes, this is Les Zeitz, member of the PRAC.
This is
Hello,
Ginger
Les.
McCall.
Hello, Ginger.
Michelle Cole for ONPA.
Rob Bovette, member of the PRAC for AOC.
Hello, Rob.
Les Ruark, interested person.
Okay, we do have a quorum. So we are going to start the meeting. I know that Michael Crone and Liz Craig are not expected to attend today. And, yeah, it looks like we have myself, Steve, Les, Scott, Rob, Mark Landauer, Tony Hernandez, Scott, did I say Scott Winkle?
I think you did.
And we have Les and Rob on the phone. Do we have Sheeran? Do we have Emily Harris on the phone?
She told me she's attending in person.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Can you hear me? It's Emily. Hello?
Is that Emily Harris?
It's Emily on the phone. I'm just parking. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Come on up when you're ready. We can hear you.
Yeah, I'm just on my way. Sorry. Okay, great. I will be there momentarily.
I was just going to say, parking was a little challenging today.
It was, even for those who work here.
I walked.
All right, well, Emily can join us when she can. We do have a quorum. The first item that we have is to approve the agenda and our previous meeting minutes. Can we get someone to move to approve meeting minutes and the agenda?
I'll make that motion.
Do I have a second? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries.
Pardon me, Chair. Pardon me. This is Michael Crone. I just wanted to let you know that I'm here a little bit late. Apologies.
Oh, very happy to hear your voice, Michael. Welcome. All right, so our motion carries, meeting minutes and agenda are approved. We have moved the agenda around a little bit to accommodate our legislative update section. I want to have two sessions of public comment today. So we'll have public comment after we have discussion amongst the council, and then we will also have public comment at the very end as kind of a catch-all if folks have comments about anything that happens after our legislative update section. So I guess I'll start out by saying that as the chair of the council, I will be prepared to prepare a letter of support for the bill as written, as the council has so voted in the past, and how the council has drafted the bill. So that is something that I will be preparing to do, and I wanted to bring that forth and see if folks have thoughts on that. If anyone would like to add their name to the letter, that will be provided as testimony during the short session. So open discussion on that. Anyone have thoughts?
Madam
This
Chair?
is Ginger. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah. Ginger?
I don't know if I'm a member of the public now or if I can speak now. Sorry, my dogs are about to freak out. I mean, I just want to say that I would like to sign in support. Obviously, I feel strongly about this. I suspect you all have seen the comments that I submitted. I mean, I think that the independence piece is very important, and there was a reason that we did a lot of work on this and agreed nearly unanimously on this proposal.
Okay, thank you. Noted, Ginger. Les, did you have something? Okay.
I had a question. Procedurally, we've supported the concepts. I wonder if it's appropriate for the council to formally vote on the draft of the language, to just be very clear about that. Unless you're comfortable with that the language does accurately represent the council's position, then we can avoid that step.
This is Ginger. We went through the language point by point. So, I mean, I'm comfortable with that as the person who had run that meeting, but, you know, I'll defer to others. I would prefer we not open up the door to that again because we did go through it point by point.
So I guess I'll open it up as a matter of voting. Do folks support the language as written in the current draft of the SB 1506? And do they support, as a council, having myself as the chair of the council providing a letter of support on behalf of the PrAC as testimony with the language as written?
This is Steve. Yes, I do.
Okay. So does someone want a motion?
So that's two motions, the endorse the draft and then direct you to write a letter.
I guess they would be separate motions, yes. So first motion, if someone wants to bring it forth to support as written, the amendment, or the bill as written.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
So all in favor?
Right?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Did someone oppose on there or on the phone? Was that an aye or a nay?
Should we revote?
We should revote. That was confusing. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
Okay, thank you. And now I'd like to bring forward a motion to have the chair produce a letter of support.
So
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So we have some decision on that. I'd like to open up members of the council. Any other thoughts before we allow public comment on this issue?
Madam Chair, I'd just like to, as a member of the PrAC, I would request that if the public is going to make comments, that they confine them to the policy at hand, rather than individuals involved in the discussions that are taking place. I want this to be about the policy, not about individuals, and I just simply make that request.
Thank you. Agreed.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
is there at some point does the PrAC want me to walk through our proposal or our concept at some point? I'm happy to do that. If you don't, that's up to you.
Briefly, if you'd like to. That might be helpful for some folks that weren't here before.
May I make a request before we do that?
Yes.
Can we have a review of what took place at the Government Operations Committee review, I believe it was last week? I believe they reviewed the LC 166. Did they take action on it?
Todd, do you know?
Oh, do you mean the General Government
General Government, yeah.
Committee? If I may, because I was actually there. They simply introduced committee bills, of which LC 166 was one of those bills. There was really no discussion, frankly, about the content or anything of that nature. It was simply a pro forma process by which the bills will be introduced as committee bills. So there's really no discussion about the substance of the measures, and I know Todd also showed up sort of late in the game after that had happened, but there really wasn't any discussion that took place.
So is LC 166 now a committee bill?
It is a committee bill, and it will be printed as such. I believe those become public Monday.
Thank you, Mark.
possibly over the weekend.
Yes.
So it's SB.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? This is Kim Thatcher. I'm on the phone. Okay, hi. I just want to pose a question. Maybe this isn't the appropriate time, but in the event there are amendments offered, or if it becomes necessary to amend it in order to pass it, whatever, is there a process the PrAC would like to take in order to do that or approve that?
That's a great question.
Do we have thoughts on that? It's complicated.
Well, this is Mark Landauer. Needless to say, from experience, these short sessions are very fast. I think it'll be very difficult to be able to potentially get a committee meeting together with a requisite public notification that's required in advance. I think it's 24 hours that we have to have advance notice, or is it?
You can do an emergency. I don't think that qualifies.
This wouldn't qualify. So I think as a public body, I think it's going to be really difficult for us to actually convene a meeting to necessarily discuss any amendments that are out there. That's not to say that I'm opposed to anything such as that, but just the pace at which things do occur there may make it prohibitive for us to be able to convene. But I think it would be helpful if we could discuss any amendments that are out there.
Yeah, so I guess what I can do is, oh, yes.
This is Les. Yeah, this is Les. Would it be functional because of those very issues that Mark raises? Is it possible the council simply just authorizes the chair and the acting advocate to act in the council's interest? Because I think it is going to be very challenging, as fluid as those events are going to be, for the council to act otherwise.
Thank you, Les. I was going to suggest something similar, deferring to our legislative experts in the room. You know, keeping in mind the spirit of what the council has agreed on. If I feel that there's an amendment that would require the council's input, I could attempt to create some sort of emergency meeting and reach a quorum of some kind during the session. So that's something that I could attempt to do, knowing that in the spirit of what the council voted on, you know, getting as close to that as possible, I think would be the goal. And having not been through a session like this myself, I really don't know what to expect. Do folks have thoughts on, Scott, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think typically what associations do, especially in the short session, is they empower based on a set of principles or something along those lines. I would say that you, and I think Mark will probably agree with this statement, is that I think I would encourage the council to give the benefit of the doubt to your negotiator, because it could happen very quickly.
This is Mark Landauer. The other workaround, if you wanted, would be to actually schedule one in advance now for a time certain during the first week of session, preferably in the latter part of the week. That gives you plenty of time to provide the public notice and what we'll be talking about, and that would be any amendments to whatever the bill number is. Whether that becomes necessary or not, you know, remains to be seen.
If I may.
Yeah.
I would also suggest that as soon as the committee assignment is made, that our advocate and the chair meet with the committee chair immediately, as many members as you can, to find out what those are, because then you could probably, I think then it's more practical to schedule even if it's a telephonic meeting with notice. That would be my advice for working the process.
Senator Thatcher raises a very good question.
Yeah. Okay, so I will take that advice and move on it. And I will just keep you all posted as your chair if we need to have a brief telephonic meeting to discuss future amendments that may be up for discussion amongst the committee.
If I may make a further request, Madam Chair.
Yes.
If you do plan on scheduling a meeting in advance, ideally for those of us who spend our time in the building, between 11 and 1 would be the best time to do so, simply because that's when committees will not be meeting.
Okay, that's very good to know. Yes. Scott.
Forgive me if you don't, if you've done this already, but you're going to spend more than 25 hours or $100 of your agency budget in the course of lobbying, so you'll need to register.
Okay, Andrea's on it, right?
If I may just clarify then, so I'm sorry, is the decision to not pre-schedule something, but just see how it goes and call a telephonic meeting if necessary, or are we going to go ahead and try to get a date penciled in, anticipating that there may be something necessary to talk about?
I think I personally like to plan ahead as much as possible. So what I will probably do is look at my calendar after this meeting and try to find a day that works for me between 11 and 1 during session, and do a doodle poll or something and just get it on the books. And then if we need to move it around, we move it around and we get it posted on our website, and then, we just do the best we can with that.
Great.
And if people can come, they can come.
That makes total sense.
Okay.
Ideally, there will be no reason for a meeting.
Yes. Great.
Yeah, I would just add, this is Steve. I think the principles we agreed on as a group are very clear, and, I think I, for one, trust you to recognize when members are deviating from what our intent was.
Okay, so I will walk that line, and if I need to bring something forth, I will, and we'll have a meeting scheduled, and if we need to cancel it, we cancel it. So, Scott, did you have something else?
No.
Okay.
Other than
Good luck.
any assistance, questions,
Thank you.
happy to assist.
Okay.
Forgive me, this is a little awkward.
Okay.
I question the role of a member who's lobbying actively against this bill to be offering advice to the chair, pushing this bill.
Fair point. There is a professional tradition in the lobby that if someone is new to the profession, that you make sure that I'm offering a professional courtesy. If you're not comfortable with that, Mr. Bovet and Mr. Landauer will also be in that process. I wasn't suggesting strategy. I was offering assistance in terms of if you had any issue on process or that sort of thing. I know when I started lobbying, opponents on bills were actually some of my best teachers. So, but I would never dream of steering you in the wrong place. If there's a concern about that, I will resolve that I would leave that to Mr. Landauer and Mr. Bovet if in the event you should require it.
Well, and I would just remind everybody that if you're appointed to a board or commission in the state of Oregon, your first obligation is to represent the public, the state of Oregon, not your individual association or client. That comes secondary. So I just want to be sure that we're all clear that as appointed officials, our first obligation is to the public and the state of Oregon. Then, everything falls behind that. So, I certainly understand your concerns, Steve, but at the same time, I think it would be ill-advised of us to, and I don't mean this in a pejorative manner, to exclude a member of the council because they may have a different opinion on the policy. I trust that Mr. Winkles will follow his statutory obligation, and that is to represent the public on this committee. So I just want to be sure that we're all reminded what our roles and responsibilities are.
I certainly support that sentiment, Mark. I think when it comes to, and I think that works generally, when it comes to a specific policy at which we're at odds inside and outside this room,
Agreed.
there is a conflict of interest, an actual conflict.
Well, and I took Scott's offer of advice as procedural and not policy related, so.
That's how it was intended.
Yeah.
And that's like, generally how our profession operates.
Do we have any other council members on the phone that have thoughts to share on any of this? Emily?
Not on the phone.
Okay.
But, and,
Hello?
you know, I mean, oh, go ahead.
Hello?
Sorry, just one moment. Emily Harris is speaking here in the room, and then we'll get to you on the phone. Sorry. Go ahead, Emily.
Sorry, Les. This may seem really obvious to everybody in the room but I'm going to ask you because I'm new. I would like you to walk through like why you are proposing amendments when we've already been through the whole thing to propose a bill.
Well,
You don't understand like what,
sure.
why you do that once the whole process has already happened.
Well, we have we've been very clear.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, may I intercede before we go forward at this point?
Yes, Les, what do you have?
Well, here's my concern, is that the amendment language is being proposed by an organization for the organization's interest. And to the comments about our primary duty as PRAC members is to the council, I'm uncomfortable having a council member sitting on the council and in the council position presenting and promoting the special interest that they're paid to represent. It just strikes me as a conflict of interest. While it may be interesting informationally, it just strikes me as inappropriate. I mean, what hat is a council member wearing when they're addressing the council on matters that they're being paid to support by their employer? So I'm concerned that we keep the line very clear about who's representing which interests at what point. And I'm concerned that going into a discussion of amendments that are not of the council's doing provides, frankly, a special entree to the council that other organizations don't appear to have.
All right, that makes sense. We can talk about it afterwards. I mean, to me, we can certainly discuss it.
Les's concerns or?
Well, I've been asked to recuse and explain the amendment, and I can't do both. So, Madam Chair, I will leave it to your discretion which you would prefer.
Well, from my understanding, members of the council are not required to vote a certain way, right? And when we had discussed the language, Scott had voiced opposition. So I guess I'm saying that, you know, each member of the council represents their group of stakeholders who are part of Oregon and have a different opinion. So I don't think that every council member is required to change their opinion based on how the rest of the council votes, but maybe I don't understand that fully.
I can speak. I'd like to speak to that. So yes, we are here to represent our own perspectives and also think of the public interest. Let me rephrase that. Not represent our interests, but we come from different backgrounds and have different expertise and different perspectives. But we are all here to represent the public interest. And we go through these deliberations, we have give and take, we reach a conclusion. And all of us can go out of here and advocate for our own positions within the legislature and other bodies. When it comes to a particular piece of legislation that this public body agrees to, it puts us really in an awkward position when one member walks away and then attempts to torpedo it. It disrupts the process, it is counterproductive, and it undermines trust. I, for one, do not know what the point is of deliberating and having a give and take and trying to come to some kind of consensus when we know that all that can be undone by any member. Now, there is certainly no way of binding members from pursuing their interests outside the council. But I would offer that it's seriously detrimental to our ability to do our job that the Senate and the governor sent us here to do.
Okay. Thank you, Steve, for your thoughts. Scott, did you have something to say, or looking at me?
Well, no, I'm not sure I have a comment for him yet.
If I may, this is Mark Landauer. You know, frankly, I'm interested in understanding why the League of Cities has taken the position that they have. I think that can't hurt us. I think that is illustrative for future discussions. I'm a little nervous about trying to stifle people's ability to explain the positions that they've taken. I'm supportive, of course, of the measure that we agreed to, but let's be very clear, people. The minute that this bill is introduced as a bill and it is published on Monday, that bill is no longer ours. That bill belongs to the 90 members of the Oregon State Legislature, and they can do with it as they please. We're an advisory body. Frankly, I'd like to understand the city's position, why they have concerns about it, so that we can gain a better and broader understanding of people's views on this committee in order for us to build that trust and understanding. You may view the city's amendment as trying to torpedo what this committee has done. I'm not supporting the amendment that's being offered by the cities, but I would like to understand their reasoning for it so that it informs me in future discussions. Furthermore, I believe that once that bill becomes a bill and owned by 90 members, anybody can offer an amendment or request an amendment. So my feeling is that having an open discussion is part of our role here. And I'll shut up at this point, but that's just sort of my feeling about the matter. I don't consider Mr. Winkle's amendment to be a torpedo, rather a difference of opinion on a very important matter. And I'd like to further understand that.
I have no objections to hearing it again. We had a very lengthy discussion of his position and other people's position in the fall, and I don't detect that it's changed dramatically.
But I would add, Steve, that we do have a new member on the council since those discussions, and I think it's an important point that we should all at least recognize as a position that has been taken by one of our members, and despite the fact that we've had very thorough discussions about it, I don't think that it hurts to take 5 minutes to just remind us where they are.
May I clarify? Just thank you, Mark, for recognizing that I'm new and the opportunity to catch up. I did review that meeting, so I feel fully informed on that. My question to you, Scott, was more, why are you bringing it up again since it has already been thoroughly discussed? That was my question. That may not be appropriate to discuss here, as Les stated, but the reasons for the position that the League of Oregon Cities is taking is clear to me based on the earlier discussion. The question is more like, well, as Steve has alluded to, why would we do this again? And that was what I was curious about, but that might not be appropriate to discuss.
Well, and we aren't entertaining any amendments to our concepts or principles agreed upon as a council, but as Mark said, it leaves our hands and is now part of a different body. Yes, Scott.
There have been public comments that asked us to explain why we were doing what we were doing. That was the spirit of why I suggested running through this. I can answer your question. I think we retain our right to dissent. And we have during the legislative process, we will testify and bring people, our attorneys and recorders in to talk about some of our concerns. But that was the, if the league doesn't feel like this is a good bill, then I don't think we're required to. We should be able to offer an alternative. That was the reason. That's why we did what we did.
So that's why you brought this to the PrAC again?
Yes, actually, I was doing this and trying to be open about what we were attempting to do. I sent it on to the Secretary of State's office after I met with, drafted it and submitted it for committee drafting. I'm not trying to hide anything.
Scott, would it be fair to say that you simply had the amendment drafted as a heads up to people that the league has concerns with the drafted measure from the PrAC? This wasn't an amendment that was being proposed by you as a member of the committee here in this body, but rather just doing what a good lobbyist does, and that is inform people about what their intentions are in advance of attempting to do so, so that everybody is clear what they're doing. Okay?
Right, and I would add, Scott was not required to tell anyone.
Correct.
He could have done, he could have proceeded as soon as session started and advocate for himself, but he wanted to be transparent and share that information so that, folks could discuss it and provide a transparent look into what the league was doing. So.
This is certainly awkward, though, I would say. But I do think that there's a fair explanation why this amendment was released. I think it was in with all good intentions. Perhaps people on this committee and the public may not have understood the context, that this isn't an amendment that's before the PrAC.
Right.
This is going to be an amendment before a legislative body. And we as individuals and we as committee members can voice our opinions before whatever body that is over at the Capitol as to whether or not that amendment ought to be adopted or should be rejected. That's sort of how I perceive this whole thing, and I think that perhaps some folks have taken it a bit beyond, because again, I don't think this amendment was necessarily intended to be a big discussion topic for this particular meeting.
No, and I will be taking, our testimony in the spirit of the principles agreed upon before, not taking into account the amendment from one member. So that's the spirit in which I will provide testimony. Yes, Les?
Well, to all these points, we can quarrel about what the intentions were. I'm frankly still troubled by the proceedings in the last session of the council when the work of the council was brought to a screeching halt for a seeming technicality, and that continues to trouble me, what was behind that. But more importantly, if to Mark's point that we ought to have a discussion and understand these things, that's all fine and well. Then I would suggest that since the council is taking the time to provide a special interest the opportunity to explain its position, that the council then, after the discussion presented by the member, we vote on whether we support the amendment or not. And I'll also move at the appropriate time. But if we're going to take council time to consider one organization's interests that are counter to the interests of the council, then it seems appropriate to me that the council members not only take a position on the original legislation, but they clearly go on the record with the position about these amendments.
Okay, understood. Scott?
That's a motion on the table. I'll second it.
No, I haven't made a motion yet.
Scott, did you have something to say?
Probably. Again, I'm simply responding to public comment that I explain why what we're trying to accomplish and why. I was never anticipating it be a point of deliberation or a motion. If the council, clearly the council can move to oppose, condemn, anything they choose to do. If it's,
I don't think that's, personally as the chair, I don't think that's necessary because we've already voted on what principles we're going to be supporting. So I don't think that we need to vote again to say that we are not supporting what we already said we were supporting. So I don't need to vote.
This is Ginger. Sorry. I don't know I don't know when I'm supposed to speak and not speak because I don't know if I'm on, I don't know if I'm supposed to be on the council, kind of, sort of, or if I'm in the public comment section. I'm not sure. So if I'm doing something that's inappropriate, I apologize.
You're a member of the public unless we're discussing that recruitment process.
Okay, as a member of the public, and I think maybe the member of the public who had asked, I think I'm the person who Scott's referring to when he said someone asked him to explain. Can I just withdraw that request for right now? Since I think that was in my public comment, and it seems like this is causing some consternation. So I will withdraw that request.
Okay, noted.
okay.
So
Yeah.
this is Michael Crone.
Michael.
This is the second time that this council has appeared to not want information in ways that I don't really understand. If we're advocating for our proposal and we're asking the acting advocate and the chair to go and do that, doesn't it help us to understand what people who are advocating against our proposal are saying and why they oppose it? I don't feel like listening to the League of Oregon Cities explain their position is somehow adopting that position for ourselves. And in fact, it seems to me like we would want our advocates to know what people are saying on the other side and understand those arguments and be prepared to respond to them rather than just close our ears and say we don't want to know because we know enough.
Okay, so I guess what I had done was read the League of Oregon Cities, statement on it before. But for those who are not aware, if Scott would very briefly describe the amendment, the context of the amendment, and then I'd like to open it up for public comment, and then I'd like to move along.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, I will go through this very quickly. First point, we're striking the independent office of the executive department. The intention there would be to, this is what we agreed to in 17, and when we supported the elimination of the sunset, we would like that agreement and what we negotiated to stand. The piece I would say, because in my experience, legislators like an option as opposed to simply asking for a no vote. We put in the idea of mimicking the Management Labor Advisory Council that was used to resolve workers' comp disputes, where there's a chair from each set of interests, co-chair from each set of interests that agree, and they convene and run the council that way. The issue on the public records advocate becoming ex officio and the executive director, there's a couple reasons there. One is I think the advocate should come back as a voting member, but I think the legislature needs to resolve the Lane versus Handy issue, the serial meeting. Putting the advocate as a member of the quorum creates potential, and I think is a structural flaw that would lead to violations of the serial quorum, the serial meeting standard that's in the statute now. And I would refer people to the public meetings manual from the Department of Justice. The other piece I mentioned, and this is the last piece I'll go into in detail, to the extent there is any personal view in this amendment as opposed to representing the interests of the league, I think I have a serious problem with asking the legislature for the affirmative authority to ask for a bill. I don't think the legislature could limit that authority for any party for any reason, and I think it's ill-advised to ask the legislature to grant you something that you have a constitutional right to do. So think of it this way: if you reverse the phrase and it was a prohibition on asking for legislature, would that be constitutional? If the answer to that question is no, I wouldn't ask the legislature for that authority, because you inadvertently create a perception or a belief that you need this authority to ask for, that you need authority to ask for a bill. I think the mistake I did make in this language that I would seek to correct would be, I would add in a reporting requirement that the PRAC report to the legislature prior to the 31st of even numbered years to the long session, ahead of the long session, on their recommendation, on seeking legislative recommendations. I do not believe that the PRAC shouldn't ask for bills. I think the way it was phrased was problematic.
Okay, I'm now opening up to public comment. Please make your comments concise, brief.
I can start. This is Brittany Ruiz, and after hearing all the discussions, I have a couple of questions that I'd like the board to look into, which is, first, how is it okay that we are wasting all of this time when there was already a vote on the language of the bill? And how is it okay that a member of the council is able to introduce an amendment without coordinating with the council? And then last of all, I have reached out to 3 different cities and asked them if they were aware of this, and they were not supportive of the language. So I don't know who Mr. Winkles is representing, but for sure, at least 3 of, and this was just a real cursory review, they were very not happy with the language and support absolutely the independence of the office and the voting rights. So I also ask that, making sure that whatever legislative amendments are put forth on behalf of his professional job, make sure that he's coordinating with the people, but also as a council. I think it's very odd that this was done without coordinating with the council when the council's already voted it, and I was there on that meeting. And that's it.
Okay, thank you, Brittany. Do we have any other comments?
This is Ginger. I submitted my comments and they're lengthy. I'm not going to read them. But one thing that I would point out to be wary of is that the language that's in the amendment, and I know Scott had said that this isn't what they intended, but the language that's in that amendment that says that the council can vet and review proposals by others, having that language in there would itself be, I think it could be interpreted as being limited, so that then the council is not placed or positioned to be able to propose legislation on its own. So, I mean, that's a minor point. I think the rest of my larger points are in the letter that I sent to you all, and I'll just leave it to the letter.
Okay, thank you, Ginger. Nick?
Nick Budnick, Society of Professional Journalists, Oregon Territory Chapter. We submitted written comments. We thank you all very much for your hard work on this issue and all the issues that you've wrestled with. We just want to reiterate our support for more independence for the advocate. We appreciate the work you've done to bolster that. We think that it's desperately needed, and free education, free training for local governments, and to ensure public trust by giving them a third party to resolve disputes without getting into a legalistic appeal. And hopefully, potentially, it will end up saving a lot of money for people as it becomes a more robust office that carves through the red tape. Finally, without bolstering the independence, if that does not take place in the short session, our fear is that, in effect, given the history, that any new advocate will feel muzzled, and therefore we support making it clear the explicit authority to introduce reforms, because that creates an expectation that the legislature will be there to listen to them. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Nick. Anyone else on the phone have a comment today?
Hi there, Alan Kessler. I also submitted a written comment. One thing I didn't put in the comment was likening the structure of the board that Mr. Winkles wanted to create, that likened it to labor versus management. forum. I hope that we can all reject the frame that this is people versus cities, trying to get records out in cities, trying to protect their own interests. The cities should have an interest in transparency as well. So the idea that the structure of capital versus labor would be the same as government versus the people is discomforting to me.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Do we have any more comments? Okay. Oh, isn't that the same?
Yes, I have a comment.
Yep.
This is Jordan Ort. I am from Stayton. I'm a city councilor there. I'm not here representing the city at all, but as a city councilor looking at this, I just want to reiterate the feeling that I support immensely the independence of this office and not having it under any of the other, having it third party, not having it under any of the branches of government to help with transparency. I've seen members of the public trying to get information, public records, and how long it takes and the red tape they have to go through already, and I can see that as an issue. I just wanted to add that in there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, public comment period closed for that topic. We will have another opportunity to comment at the very end regarding the recruitment process. The next item we have on our agenda, we do have an update from Michael Crone regarding the ability of the council to take up other business other than the hiring of the advocate. I don't know if we need to go into too much detail on this. I did provide that information to council members, but for those listening in, we are able to take up other issues other than the hiring of the advocate. Mark, did you have something to say?
Just a question for Mr. Crone. Did you get a good price on that opinion?
I did. I got a very good deal. And I think as long as our legal needs continue to be limited, I'll probably be able to do that. But, you know.
Thanks for your help on that, Michael.
Of course, and thanks to Andy Foltz, who may or may not be listening in, who worked on the opinion.
Okay, next item of business, the advocate recruitment. I do have, yes.
Before we move on to that, so do we need to, or I take it that you are accepting the opinion that we can conduct other business?
Yes.
Because the opinion said you can in different ways, but you face low risk.
Yes, and I believe that we should move forward. Yes, Scott.
I'm not going to sue, so.
Okay. Scott's not going to sue. We've already talked about a lot of other things.
Okay.
And I believe that I've agreed with Andy's assessment, and was happy to see that. So we do have some materials that I've provided to you all. They are on our website. Mark, did you have a question?
I'm just, I'm curious, is the current acting public record advocate dismissing himself because of...
It appears that he did.
Okay, and will he be coming back? Do you know? Maybe not.
I can fetch him.
No, that's okay.
Especially if we take a break.
Okay, I thank you. I'll withhold anything for the moment. Let's get on with the agenda. Thank you.
Okay. So I do have materials that I asked you all to review. I did provide them again to you today. They have been up on the website. Essentially what I need folks to think about and agree upon today, if possible, is a timeline. I need folks to vote on whether they would like for either Secretary of State's office or working with DAS to post the announcement, post and open the recruitment either February 3rd or March 9th. So that is what we are voting on today. If we post it February 3rd, I did provide you the version of the announcement that would be, which provides 2 paths for folks and is explicit in that. Do folks need me to read that? Chris, can you pull it up? Okay, thank you.
February 3rd.
it's on the second page that it discusses the session and that there is a possibility that the legislature will make changes to the statute, which could result in a different selection of voting process. So we include that language if we are posting the announcement February 3rd. If we are posting it March 9th after session, then there are two options that I've created. One, with the bill passing, presuming that I recognize the bill if it passes, right? And then one if it fails. So I've got three ready. Do folks have any discussion on when they would like us to post that? Scott?
I would suggest that it be released on the 3rd of February. I think going back to the memo, there are multiple readings of that language according to DOJ. I think it would be best for the council to go in. I think there's an interpretation that says the legislature intended that we act quickly to replace the advocate.
Okay.
I think there's a reading where it says we can move quickly on it. I think there's an argument to be made that there was intent that the position not be vacant for any longer than is necessary.
Okay. Thank you for those thoughts. Steve?
I would like that quickly as well. I think now there's a big question mark over what's going to happen to this legislation because there's probably strong opposition. So I think for that reason, it would be advisable to wait till then.
Okay.
So I'm sorry, Steve, so you're suggesting to wait until March?
Yeah. So we have certainty for the applicant.
And I would not anticipate that I would need to call another meeting before I post it because I'm hoping that we can agree on everything.
Stephanie, can you give the council your advice on whether we should go through DAS or through the Secretary of State's office? I'd like your opinion on this because, as some of the council members may recall, the Secretary of State's office had put in quite a bit of work in preparing for recruitment. And I don't want that work necessarily to be wasted.
Right.
And so perhaps you could give us maybe an update or your thoughts on how you would like to proceed, and then we can perhaps address the timing issue because I'd just like to have a fuller picture in my mind before I make a decision, if that's okay.
Sure. I think if the council would like to move forward with the February 3rd, then I think there's a little bit more pressure on the Secretary of State's office to run the recruitment because we have not coordinated with DAS yet. Right. And I don't know if they are going to want to put their own spin on the way that they word things. That being said, Liz Craig did weigh in on the announcement and she had very few changes, just language here and there. In terms of what I prefer, I think I would prefer that DAS run it, honestly, because Todd is obviously transitioning to being hosted by DAS in his pursuit of independence and having his own house. And I think that would be a little bit more in alignment with where we are moving in that relationship. But I think that I will have everything ready on our end so that I can hand it to DAS if they are doing the recruitment, so that I would not be worried about much of a delay, if any, on their end with just posting it, because we will have done all the work. We will have already decided what we're looking for, what questions we're asking, and how the interview process is going to go, which is really the information that they need. So I would like to get the council's agreement on all the materials today, so that if I go back to our HR folks and meet with the DAS HR folks and they decide that it needs to be handled by DAS, then we're still ready, right? And we can still meet our target dates. So I don't want that to be a deciding factor. Do folks have strong opinions either way, other folks besides Mark and Steve and Scott, on when we are posting this, before or after session?
Sounds like you said DAS is preferred.
Yeah.
It sounds also like not waiting till March is also.
For me, I I would personally think that it would be smoother to wait until March as an HR person.
I will withdraw my suggestion that we move forward on the 3rd. I think if it's smoother, if you view it smoother, better process, then I would agree with the March 9th date.
Then I'll make the motion that we advertise.
Oh, wait, this is Ginger. I have a logistical question. Sorry, I wanted to insert this, but there wasn't a good moment. So my question is, the way that the legislation currently stands, the advocate has to be confirmed by the Senate. I believe that that's something that we proposed changing in our proposal, but the question is, how is that timing going to work with the posting of the announcement and the short session ending? Do we have a plan for that, and does that affect the timing that we want to choose here?
You mean if the
This is Rob Bovet. I haven't chimed in yet. Maybe I can answer that if the council's okay or the chair's okay with that.
Please do, Rob.
Sure, and Ginger raises a valid point there, because if it is the council that is going to be appointing the advocate rather than the governor, then there wouldn't be, under the Oregon Constitution, a Senate confirmation required. So if the legislation actually passes, it's more of a direct hire from the council to the advocate rather than running through the Senate process, which is fine. So that actually streamlines things. But I will point out, and I think this addresses both Ginger's question and the question before, which is broader, we did include a Section 4 in the bill that basically just validates everything the PRAC does under the current statutes and makes it equally apply moving forward. So I really don't have, from my perspective, I don't have an objection or an issue about when you start this process, because even if we start it and the law changes on us, we've included in the legislation that it essentially flows right through seamlessly. So I think really ultimately the answer to Ginger's question is, if the legislation does pass in the middle of the selection process, if we start earlier or we've just started, then we can just simply shorten it up, because we won't have to wait for a Senate confirmation for the new advocate to start work.
Although if we end up hiring somebody who's not bar certified in the state of Oregon, as our previous advocate was, it may take a little bit longer. But hopefully we have people who are highly qualified and are members of the Oregon State Bar. Madam Chair, I would move, I make a motion that we issue advertising for the vacant position on the latter date, which I believe was March 9th.
Mm-hmm. Great. All in favor of posting on March 9th?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, thank you. The next item, that would mean that we would be meeting to review the application materials April 15th. Any discussion around that? No? I really was trying to have a tight timeline if we're posting it for 3 weeks. That would allow either our HR department or DAS's HR department time to review the applications, score them appropriately so that we're only seeing applicants that are meeting the minimum qualifications, and then getting that material with enough time for us to review it, and then meet back on April 15th. So do we need to vote on meeting on April 15th?
Just have your taxes done.
Have your taxes done, please, council.
Is there a document with this timeline on it?
No, it was within the announcement. On the second page, I had put in some dates. But I will send out invites. I will send out invites if folks agree to these dates, to hold them on your calendars.
For the 15th to do the review.
April 15th, yep.
Do you need to vote on that?
I think I do. Yeah, can we get?
So, I'm sorry, but how long will the position, how long between the 9th and what's the closing date?
So it would be 3 weeks from the 9th.
Okay.
It's going to close.
And then there's like
30th.
built in for staff to collate it,
Yes,
and then a week for us to read, and then.
yes.
Got it, okay.
That's me factoring in realistic hiring manager timelines. So I did get a motion. Do I have a second for April?
Second.
Okay, all in favor of April 15th for meeting to review application materials?
Hi.
Any opposed? All right. Another date to throw out there would be interview date, April 29th. We do need to post in the announcement when the interview date will be. That was a recommendation from our HR director. So any motion to meet April 29th for the interviews?
So
I may very well have a conference that would prevent my attendance, but I certainly will make every attempt to do so.
May I ask, just for point of clarification, these would be afternoon meetings, attempting to keep them to 3 hours, or would they be anticipated to be longer meetings?
For the interview, I would like folks to hold the whole day if possible, because we want to prepare for that. We don't know, we'll be reviewing the materials and scoring those and deciding who we want to interview, and we want to leave enough time.
And for the April 15th meeting, would that be the same? Also?
Yeah, April 15th is when we'll meet to review applications, and then April 29th would be the interview date.
And I'm sorry, April 15th, would you anticipate that being?
That should be 3 hours or less.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, Stephanie, to sort of tag on to Emily's line of questioning, would you, the 15th meeting be a morning, afternoon? What time are we shooting for? The typical time that we do, say 1:30 to 4:30?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Our typical time would work well for that.
Thank you.
Unless folks are opposed, or I can do that. So do I have a second for April 29th for interviews? Second. Okay, all in favor, April 29th for interviews?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
I have a point of order. Will there be, do you anticipate discussing somewhere in here the job description itself?
Today?
Yes, so we have not voted on finalizing the announcement yet. Even though that was my number one item here, I wanted to get those dates out of the way. So the language that I provided to you is that 2-pass, but that, I'll be stripping that out. Chris, can you pull up the post-session
Which one?
announcement? We'll go with Bill passing. The Sunny pass. So the minimum qualifications came from the statewide required minimum qualifications for that principal executive manager G position, which is what we'll be recruiting for. That's the level of the advocate. Desired attributes, these were pulled off of what we did last time, quite frankly. Last time we did require a writing sample. So I'll be doing that again unless folks are opposed. I did not put a whole lot more detail in here. Do folks have other attributes that they'd like to see in there?
I just had one addition I would like to throw out there for the job description. Just mentioned twice, the one thing it doesn't touch on is the actual kind of proactive advocacy role for policy. And I think you could get at that by adding the fact that the advocate is also a member of the Public Records Advisory Council, which recommends improvements to record law.
Okay.
Maybe the second one.
Is there any discussion on Steve's suggestion? No? Okay, do folks want to move to approve the announcement as written with Steve's suggestion?
So moved.
Second? All right, all those in favor of the announcement as written with Steve's suggestion?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Executive session. There were conversations before regarding whether or not to conduct the interviews in an open setting, as we did last time, or within an executive session. Does anyone have any items to discuss related to that? Thoughts, opinions, feelings about that?
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Stephanie, my recollection, and forgive me, I'm not terribly good with names, but the HR manager from the Secretary of State's office, I believe I had asked actually her personal opinion as to whether or not interviews ought to be conducted in a public forum or in an executive session. My recollection, which is certainly prone to be faulty, was that she recommended executive session in order to avoid the potential for other candidates to be able to listen in and so forth.
Yes.
So is my recollection correct? And if so, I would move as a matter of a professional's opinion on this, not being an HR person, but I believe that her analysis was correct, that we conduct the interviews in executive session. And I will readily admit that I know this is the public record committee here, and I'm reluctant to do so, but I think that there's a real legitimate reason why we would want to do that in executive session, so that all candidates have an even playing field from the get-go, and that's simply my opinion.
Okay, you are right, Mark.
Is there a way to modify that? I'm sorry, is there a way to modify that so that it could be released after the hiring was done, so that it's open at some point, but, you know, rather than keeping it secret the whole time?
I don't think you can release executive session after the fact. I know that there are provisions for members of the reporting community to attend. These are things that I'm investigating, never having led an executive session before, but the DOJ's Attorney General's Public Records and Meetings Manual is very helpful. They have checklists and all kinds of nice companion documents to help folks like me navigate that. But no, I do not believe that the interviews would be released after. But
I think, maybe I'm incorrect here, but I do think scoring can be of interviewees, so we might need a little help here from.
I will get help from Tasha, and I think what we would have is, you know, as we are receiving the applications and going through that, that will be a public meeting, right? That is not an executive session, it would just be the interviews. So during that meeting, we can decide, if we can't decide today whether we're doing the interviews in the executive session, we can decide that on April 15th, if folks want to punt.
Okay, dumb question if I may.
No.
Are the, when we review the applications, are the names blacked out? Okay, so they're not? No. So then what would be the protective measure of someone, it would be public record that someone had applied for the position anyway?
To clarify, Emily, during our last meeting, I believe it was, I asked the question of the HR director in the Secretary of State's office, her recommendation on whether to conduct interviews with candidates who have gotten through the first process of going through resumes and so forth. We select people to interview. I had asked her recommendation on whether or not those interviews ought to be public or in executive session. Her recommendation was in executive session for the primary reason, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but the primary reason was that if you conduct it in a public fashion, other candidates who are going to be interviewed could theoretically listen in to other candidates' interviews and therefore gain potentially an unfair advantage over other individuals who are also being interviewed for the same position. If I butchered that, please correct me, but that was my understanding.
Well, I think Emily's asking about the resume review process, which will be.
That will be public, absolutely.
So I understood that there was a different reason for conducting an executive session, so I may be off base here, but I thought that was to protect the rights of people who are applying for a job and may not want to let their employees know that. But the point you bring up of giving an advantage, I mean, witnesses are sequestered. I wonder if that's a true concern, if there's and they're all going to be interviewed on the same day, if there was a process to handle that. I mean, if that's truly the concern.
If it's a public meeting, it's a public meeting, and the way that, the technology works, I can't lock people out or, control if they give a fake name or something. And they would be phone interviews, so, yeah.
But Emily, you were correct in, if I recall as well, the HR director did also mention your point about individual applicants not wanting their current employers knowing about their desire to gain a new job as well. But I don't think you can protect anybody from that, because once you submit your resume, it is a public document.
It's a public record.
And the only thing that would prevent the release of that is if it was, I don't think you can.
No.
They could probably request that it be maintained as being confidential, but I don't think you can necessarily do that in this circumstance. So you are correct that there is some concern about those who have jobs who don't want their employers to know that they're seeking a different job, which would sort of further push us towards an executive session. But I would like to hear Senator Thatcher's thoughts on this, seeing as though she did raise the question in the first place, because I'm certainly open to her thoughts and guidance on this as well.
Well, I don't know if I have any thoughts and guidance, other than it seems pretty ironic to be the public records advocate, advertising for that and then have it done in secret. And so I was trying to figure out some way to not give an advantage to one candidate or the other through having it being a public process, but seeing if there is a way to eventually make it public. And maybe that's just to allow the media to be in the room. I don't know. Are there rules against that?
No, in fact, you're required, I believe, to provide access to media, and you have to issue guidance on what they are able to report and what they're not able to report. Tony?
Is there a way to just have or ask staff to create a summary of the executive session that we publish after, or I mean, in the spirit of the transparency of who we are, I agree that there's reporters that are allowed. I remember being a reporter and sitting on county executive sessions with the idea of not, you can't publish anything, but our situation is a circumstance of, in the spirit of transparency, I'm wondering if there's any way to just summarize the responses
I'm sure
Michael Crone, actually, can I speak to some of these issues of the public meetings law?
Yes, please.
Okay. So first, I'm just going to start by reminding everyone that we are going to have to run through a few prerequisites to conduct this particular set of interviews in executive session, because when you're hiring a chief executive, which I think this position qualifies for, there are some statutory prerequisites. I'm pretty sure that the HR team is on top of it, but we need to make sure those things happen, and they do include a requirement for public notice. Second, in terms of your question, I think it was Tony Hernandez just speaking about disclosing the record after the fact. We are, as a public body, still required to either record or keep minutes of our executive sessions. And frankly, there is nothing that would prevent us from disclosing those records after the fact, when the interest that we were protecting was no longer really relevant. Finally, in terms of the names of people who apply, the AG's office for a very long time has held that names of finalist applicants are public, but names of non-finalist applicants may be protected from disclosure. So depending on whether there's a sort of a pre-screening process that leads to some people not even getting to the interview stage, I think it's possible we may be able to protect some names of the non-finalist candidates, but people are right that the finalists that we would be interviewing would be a matter of public record.
So this is Rob, and if I could maybe chime in again, if it's okay.
Please do, and then Steve, please go after Rob. Thank you.
I would just echo what Michael had to say, but having had a lot of experience with this particular subsection of executive session law, I'm a lot more conservative about how I apply the chief executive officer exception, which allows for executive sessions. There are some things that have to be done under Oregon law to make that fly. Michael already mentioned one, the public notice, but you actually have to provide for public input into the process. And before you even get there, you have to have a regular hiring procedures that are fully vetted and adopted. So yes, I think that the Secretary of State or DAS could go through the rituals to make it comply, but I will tell you out of personal experience that when you do this, it is very clunky and awkward. And I know we did all of our stuff in open session, and that was clunky and awkward also when we wound up hiring or recommending the governor hire Ginger. But I caution folks, we really need the Department of Justice, I think, or DAS to really interject themselves early on in this process, because we may actually need to adopt some regularized hiring procedures, in addition to, complying with the other paragraphs of that statute before we can go there. So we may need meetings before we actually conduct an executive session to make this fly legally, and I don't want to see the Public Records Advisory Council inadvertently violating public meetings law. So I'll stop there, and I'll just toss that out there.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate that follow-up, but yes, I also agree. And I know it's Steve's turn, so I'm sorry, Steve.
Steve's turn.
That's all right. I'm not going to forget. I'm not going to argue in favor of executive session, but if we do go there, I think the way to go would be to release the transcript as soon as possible, possibly that day, as soon as the interviews are done. My recollection last time around that we approached 6 people about interviewing, I believe, and none of them had any qualms about doing public interviews. So that concern is not a major one, I don't think. It's hard to say what'll happen this time, but in terms of the most recent state's concern about unfair advantage, there is one solution to that, and that's to release the questions in advance.
Which we did they're on our website, we're actively discussing them, and they will have them in advance. And honestly, even as a hiring manager here at Secretary of State's office, I do provide questions in advance. Because I think the interview process is more enjoyable for all parties when people can come prepared. Mark.
Thanks, Steve, because it sounds like we've got a clunker one way or the other, and I don't mean that in a poor way, but it seems to me, we hired a very capable individual the last time with the process that was open and transparent, and I've sort of changed my mind here, despite the fact that the HR director recommended that it be an executive session. I think in the spirit of transparency, we probably ought to just continue to make this public, and request that those people who are going to be interviewed, that they refrain from listening to other interviews, just as a matter of course, and hope that process and that request is honored by those individuals. I think that it sounds to me like pursuing an executive session process is going to be a little bit complicated, add to your workload, Stephanie. Let's just do this publicly and with understanding that You know, we will ask those who are asked for an interview to refrain from listening in to others, and hopefully they'll have the professional courtesy to follow that advice. And that way we can have this thing opened up, and it's going to be far less work on behalf of you as well as the Department of Justice and probably others as well. So that I've sort of changed my mind about this. And I would move, as a result, to hopefully move this meeting along, that we conduct those interviews in a public forum.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor of no executive session with a public interview process?
Aye.
Aye.
Hearing no opposition, the motion carries. Thank you, everyone. We already discussed application materials. We'll continue to have a work sample required. I can't think of anything else they would need to submit. I have in the past here had applicants prepare a presentation. That's been something that we can talk about that during the interview preparation applicant screening meeting. Do we want to have some sort of presentation? You know, how would you present public records access issues to a local government or something like that? Might be interesting for the council to consider, but maybe we see what our applicant pool looks like and decide if that's something that we need to add to the process. So scoring process. I did print out once again the handy dandy point ranking. Do you want to pull that up, Chris? The interview evaluation methods page. We have a couple of different options. We can do points, where you're giving points per answer. And there's a perfect score, and we add the total up, and that tells us who we're interviewing. There's piling. It's from the December meeting.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And then the first time around, you all did forced ranking, where, you know, candidate 1 interviews. So there's a number 1 spot, candidate 2 interviews. Now you have 1 and 2, and you shift them around. I was not involved in the tallying last time, so I don't know how those were added up, but I would talk to HR about the best way to do that. Piles would be, you know, different piles of, yes, we want to interview this person, and no, we don't want to interview these candidates, that sort of thing. But we need to have written notes, right, and have each council member explain why they're putting different candidates in different piles. We can't just have a gut reaction. We have to have our notes and our justifications for everything. Internally, I use points. It seems to be the cleanest. It seems to work out pretty well for us here at Secretary of State's office. Scott, did you have something?
I think points are great, and the reason is it's a lot more defensible, especially if you're applying veterans preference, that you have an objective scoring point system. That you can if somebody appeals.
So
that's what we did back then.
We did ranking, or you guys all did ranking, which is a little bit messier from my perspective. Points, it's pretty clear. If someone gives a good answer, you give them a good score, and you're writing notes as to why you're giving them that score, and that, again, is a lot more defensible than, well, I don't know why I put them in this pile.
So A and B are both a point type of system.
Yeah, right. Let's see, rating scale, each question and evaluation entered on the initial resume review. Okay, so that first one, I believe, is for, it's weighting it with the resumes. No,
I think that the option B has the weighting where different questions are more important than other questions.
Yeah.
So then that changes the.
I have not done it that way before. I usually do kind of a clean, if I can get it to equal 100 and kind of break it out, you know, if we have 10 questions, I do 10 points each, and just try to keep it pretty clean. Any other hiring managers have stuff that they want to share?
So under option A, the one with the highest scores would essentially get the job?
Yeah, essentially. And, you know, based on the scoring, sometimes you have a second round. But usually there's a pretty clear break.
Can I understand the process? If you are ranking people during an interview or looking at their materials, let's do it during the interview because the materials, well, I guess you'd be right. But if in your understanding, in your professional work and hiring, if you rank and then are you allowed to go back and revisit your ranking?
Absolutely.
You are. So you could go through 8 candidates, find out that the person who that your own answers surprised you and you wanted to revisit your numbers, you are allowed to do that?
You are. And the entire time, at least for us, it's a discussion, right? You know, well, why did you give that person 8 points? I gave them 5. Or, you know, oh, well, I missed that point. That makes sense. It's kind of a back and forth. And then really you're looking at your scores and you're thinking about, it's very hard not to, if you have the first candidate, right, you don't know what the other candidates are going to be like yet. So it can be a little bit skewed until everyone's interviewed, and then you kind of look at how, you know, oh, I gave this person 5 points for this answer, and this other person answered very similarly. Why did I not give them, you know, so you're reassessing the entire time until we've made our decision, and then I collect all the materials, and then you can't go back and change them after we.
Sounds like grading grad school.
So it's, you know, it's a back and forth sort of process, but
thank you.
Yeah. So do we have any motions? Anyone?
I mean, the only difference seems to be between A and B. There is a difference of like giving questions about like value, but you've talked about just dividing them evenly.
Yeah.
And then just so I'm perfectly clear, C and D, you do need to provide additional materials for justification. The
Yes,
ranking
you gotta have
A and B takes care of it.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other discussion or thoughts on that?
Do you want a motion?
I would like a motion to
I
use
would-
points.
I would move option A.
Okay. So the second.
Second.
All right. All those in favor of using a point scale for the interview process?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed to using points? Okay, so move. Points it is. And then last piece of business for the advocate recruitment, the interview questions. Again, in your stack of documents, Chris, can you pull up the document? The interview questions. So I made some executive decisions in my own mind and got rid of some that were particularly onerous last time that caused confusion. I did listen back to the interviews and try to feel out how those questions landed, and there were some obvious ones that could go from my perspective. So if folks want to discuss, I also participated in the second round of interviews for the Small Business Ombudsman last week and stole a couple of questions from them for that process. So I've added those here, questions 8 and 9 down on Stephanie's suggested list. How you handle critical conversations that have the potential to be perceived as confrontational, please share a specific experience. And then what techniques did you use to de-escalate while still moving forward with the substance of a critical conversation? I thought that those were, you don't have it, I just added them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're not on the website yet, but they are on the copy that I provided to the council today. So I guess I'm just opening it up for discussion if folks would like to entrust me with writing the final list, or if you have particular questions that you don't want to see on there or that you like. Scott.
First, thank you for doing all of that.
Yeah,
That
sure.
sounds like a significant undertaking.
It's okay.
I understand, but I should say thank you. I'm fine in trusting you. I think the work that I'm seeing on the screen and what was in the packet looks really good to me.
I only wonder whether we should hone the list to make it a little shorter.
It would be shorter.
Yeah.
So basically, what I would be asking the council is to empower me to whittle this down to 10 questions.
So moved.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You mentioned the idea of doing some kind of presentation.
Yeah.
I would like to see a candidate, you know, in action a bit.
Okay.
But a very small, like maybe there's a way to do a presentation on one specific aspect, like something that they perhaps would like to choose from the Oregon Public Records, or they could choose their audience, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that would support, you know, your question number one could build off of that, but I would like to see what they've come up with.
Okay.
Idea.
What I would suggest is, again, in the small business ombudsman recruitment that I just participated in, they had a 5 to 7 minute presentation, and they were given a choice of 3 different topics. So we might do something like that here. I would hesitate to have a 15 to 20 minute presentation because, boy, do we not have time for that. 5 to 7 minutes seem to be a good window where they have enough time to kind of articulate a thought, right, but it doesn't drag on and on. So with folks' permission, I would add that into our package of questions, really. It would be scored. Thoughts?
I would say, like, if I remember correctly, we chose 7, like, I would say even less than 10 with the presentation, because 7 seemed like we were stretching the time, if like we were strategically set that a little bit. So I think we covered.
Okay.
The bullet points that you laid out in one of the other, than the job description, and cover the things that we need to.
What we could do is 8 questions. Some of them maybe not as long and requiring longer answers, like, you know, what are the 3 things most important to you in a job, something like that. That doesn't take, you know, 20 minutes to answer that. We could do 8 questions and then having them be 10 points each. And then we can have a 9th question, which is the presentation, and we can have that be 20 points to equal 100. I don't know.
Reasonable approach.
Okay.
Can I ask one more?
Yes.
A question and a suggestion.
Sure.
Something that I'd endorse considering in the question options. Question, I just want to clarify that no follow-ups are allowed in these state interviews. Is that correct?
So if you're interviewing a candidate and they are talking about some specific experience or something and you want more information about that thing, you can ask a follow-up question. What you cannot do is pivot to a completely different topic and only ask that one candidate that question, because we have to ask all candidates the exact same questions. But you are allowed to ask a follow-up question if there's some clarifying point based on something they said, and they can't be leading questions. So, you know, if you know one of the applicants and you, please tell me about your experience working for this organization. If you know the person, right, that's not an equal treatment. Okay. So we wouldn't want to see that.
That is helpful, thank you. And then I would just look at the question number 5 from the 2017 questions and consider the role of the advocate as a mediator in the process, and encourage some kind of question that gets at that skill set.
Okay.
You know, this is kind of edging toward that, and it's a little bit different, but I think that that's a really important piece. And I want to ask everybody else on the council, and given the fact that, you know, we're going to add in the job description the record of as a member of the PRAC, which recommends improvements to public records law, do we want to ask a question about experience with lawmakers? Would that be something of interest, or we would expect that to come up in the cover letter since that's part of the job description? I'm just curious what people's thoughts are on that.
You mean in terms of lobbying?
Lobbying or anything. I mean, anything, any experience, direct experience with the legislative process could be a big range of things. Could be a former lawmaker, could be a lobbyist, could be a committee staff member. I have no idea, but we just expect that to come up in there.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to know and to consider. But I don't know that I would blow a question, 1 of 8 questions on that.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like a fairly narrow one. Some of the other questions that you have here are
much more wide.
I mean, the experience, I think.
That could also, that could also be included in desired attributes, right? Is that sort of experience, if you will? I think it's a fair question, Emily.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, so Chris brings up a good point. our recruitment system has required questions that people are required to answer and give like years of experience. So do you have experience with interacting with the legislature or something like that? And then if so, how many years of experience? It's kind of a screening question. We could add something like that in there for the screening, and it doesn't eliminate candidates, but it lets us know if they answered yes or no, and then gives the years of experience.
Stephanie, are those only yes or no questions?
It's a mix.
Okay, so perhaps if they answer yes, can you get a please explain, so we get a little bit more depth there, rather than, yeah, I've dealt with the legislature because I was an intern or whatever, but I'd like a little bit more meat
We have
to
a lot
that.
to say, please describe your experience.
Yeah.
If you indicated yes, describe your experience, which is open-ended.
Perfect.
Yeah, and what I can do is take this kind of long list, and as I'm meeting with HR, I'm getting all the materials finalized and into the website, right, for screening. There might be some of these that I steal from and put into the website. And then others we leave for the actual interview process. So with your approval, I will navigate that.
The only other question I want to publicly endorse, if I may, is number 4 in your 2020 to describe the.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I like that one.
Like that.
And I would move to empower Stephanie to use her great judgment on what questions we should pose.
Okay.
Yeah,
Second. All right, all those in favor of empowering the chair to move forward with finalizing the questions, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Nobody? Everyone on the phone left us now.
I may have missed my moment for this, but, to Emily's point, I guess, so you are gonna incorporate something about, an optional question about if you have experience with the legislature?
Yes, I will add that either as one of our questions or as part of the screening process, a question that they will answer before we even see them.
So is that kind of what you're getting at, like, experience with advocacy?
You know, I just wondered if that was something you wanted to ask about. I didn't have a specific thought about what I wanted to know, just because, but I was curious whether people thought that was something that's important to get a little more details on, because it is, you know, potentially an important role. I mean, it's not, that person wouldn't be acting alone, so it's not so important perhaps, but it was really more of an honest feeler question.
Well, I think it was a very fortuitous question, because if you all recall, our little sunset bill wasn't going to get introduced unless a certain public records advocate went and pounded some marble, if you will, and got some bills introduced. So I think it's a very legitimate question and something that ought to be included.
But if you're just, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. And they're gonna have to make their case for the Ways and Means process regardless.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's an important aspect.
But to Steve's point of that not being perhaps such a potent discussion question, I think that was that mostly your feeling about keeping it sort of in the first, like, you know, answer it in written form?
I was just wondering whether we wanted to phrase it as, what's your experience with advocacy on behalf of a policy, which would include dealing with lawmakers, I guess. But I mean, I'm just wondering how other people feel, because it's my sense that, like, we would like somebody to be an articulate and passionate advocate for their position, our position.
Their role is advocate.
Right.
So it does make it sort of a natural question.
It'd be nice, yeah, if they can demonstrate that they have advocated before, right? Right. So it might actually be two questions. I mean, one is, have you had an advocacy role, number one, and number two, describe any experience you may have with a legislative body. It doesn't have to be a legislature, it could be virtually any type of legislative body, I would assume.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I've made a note to add both of those points. So I do want to open up public comment for anyone on the phone regarding the recruitment process at this time. Nobody's there. Hello? Anyone? Anyone in the
This is
chat?
Ginger. This is Ginger. It all sounds good to me. I think all of this sounds good, and I liked your list of questions.
Oh, thank you very much, Ginger.
And then on the chat, Christian Wolf has just made a series of comments, basically,
Do you want to read them?
just basically saying experience with lawmakers is important. Why? Because we're mostly up against the executive branch. They need to be able to garner support from the legislature. The executive branch will certainly be schmoozing them. And then demonstrate a personal passion with an exclamation point.
Okay. Okay. Do we want to take a break before addressing subcommittees? Or do we want to table subcommittees for another meeting?
Or press on, is that also an option?
I mean, we should take a break.
You're right.
If we're going to address subcommittees today, to allow people to have a break, or we can table that and talk about it another day. Yes.
Can you describe to me what, I understand the committees, what is the time frame that you're trying? You have no time frame.
No, I just want to honor other members.
Well, right, and I want to honor my commitments to folks when we had a very long discussion back in September, I believe it was, at which time I remain committed to having those discussions. My recollection is that I thought it was important for us to get somebody hired.
Yes.
First.
Agreed.
And it would be my preference if we could delay that with the hope that we can get somebody on board in a permanent fashion to be able to do that. Now, that's not to say that I'm not opposed to putting together the committees at this time, but I do think that the permanent public records advocate ought to be steering those discussions. That's my perspective.
Steve, thoughts?
I certainly see why it would be beneficial to have the public records advocate steering this discussion, the new public records advocate. I think the downside to that is the compressed time frame to get us to January of next year. I think it's going to be a heavy lift, even starting right now, frankly. So, I mean, given that we are all, except for Emily, the same people who pushed for these subcommittees before, and we are the drivers here, I think on balance, I think it still makes sense to try and start moving forward on it, even if it's just to organize things.
Let me preface it this way, Steve. I'd be happy to begin those discussions even without a permanent advocate, provided it's after the legislative session has concluded.
Same.
That's my elephant in the room at the moment.
Yes, Tony.
So I, unfortunately, and I apologize, I missed the meetings when we discussed committees and descriptions. And so given that,
Okay.
I'm wondering if there's a way, it would be great to do work after the session. I agree, especially if there's a time crunch to get other stuff considered for next year, but I don't know, I can kind of guess what the committees are, but I would just like to know how or when I could get things on.
Well,
that could be another day. I just wanted to
it's fair. I think I could quickly describe it if you'd like.
Sure.
Fees, as you know, public bodies can charge fees for the production of public records. There has been discussions amongst people that there perhaps ought to be some type of consideration for the media. Okay, so that would be, if I understand correctly, the fees subcommittee. The data subcommittee, Steve is going to be able to explain this far better than I, but it's, I believe, a metadata proposal that prospectively public bodies, when they are purchasing IT, would require, as a part of the specifications, that metadata and the glossary to that metadata be available either electronically or production. Steve, please help me. I'm way the heck over my skis on that one.
Well, I mean, it's sort of, you pretty well encapsulated something that I have cared about and worked for. I would think the data subcommittee would want to look at this more broadly and look at all the special concerns that arise out of disseminating data that's a public record.
And then, Tony, the last one, independence, is sort of being addressed in our legislative concept, but the sustainability issue goes back to, again, independence, because you have the legislative branch actually appropriating money for the purposes of the public records advocate and their overhead, their staff, everything. One could construe that that creates leverage, and so there has been discussion about how can we make the public records advocate office independent from the legislative appropriation process. And the idea was using a model similar to the Oregon Government Ethics Commission, I believe, whereby local governments and the state pay directly to a fund that is dedicated solely for the purposes of the Public Records Office, and that money would be based on population, if you will, or there are other models that you can use, but the Government Ethics Commission is independently financed through a fee process that the state has created for all local governments that are under the umbrella of the Government Ethics Commission. Did I get that right? Kind of?
Yeah, actually, I was the one who wrote the for the Ethics Commission years ago.
That's why I was looking to you, Scott.
I did it because they were going to make us pay for it, and I wanted to include you.
Yeah. Thanks for the generosity.
I'm a giver. Yeah, I think that was, you explained that well. I meant to include, I thought I had or intended to, I wanted to participate in the data subcommittee.
Oh, okay.
So I have a question then, I don't know if we particularly enjoy staying and discussing this all, but I often feel like, I'm in a great presence of very legal, great minds and long-storied reporters, and like my interest here, for me personally, and the skills that I bring has been always the public education component of this office, whether it's educating elected or public officials or members of the press or just general people in the public. I'm really interested in helping that out. So I don't know if there's a possibility of creating a fourth group or intention. I don't feel like out of the three committees that have been discussed, I can do my homework and stuff, but I feel like my skills are better suited. So I just wanted to bring that as a potential thing to discuss whenever we.
What committee would you like to see formed?
Committee to support the advocate in his or her training operations. So in their efforts to set up, trainings at a university or at a city, municipality or a special district. Does the advocate have the proper support in terms of maybe communication to the agencies or PR? I like social media, and I know that the acting advocate and Ginger also kind of works to kind of increase their social media. So just kind of, for lack of a better word, like public PR kind of support, I think is an important.
Would you want to look at I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Would you like to look at the curriculum that's being used,
Yeah, for sure.
that sort of thing?
It's not to oversee or provide oversight of what the advocate is doing, but more it's just kind of how to support their
promoting the opportunity to get those type of services.
So like a public education committee?
Yeah, something like education to employees and requesters and the.
Can I ask a question about the intent of these subcommittees? Obviously, there's plenty of work to do on public records here in the state, but is the intent to look at these issues because they may be the most beneficial to focus legislation on next year? Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
And rather than like ongoing necessarily committees to continue safe conversation.
I think part of this was Ginger's leadership looking to actually get us to legislation that we could endorse for 2021. And so these would be targeted. These are topic areas that are areas of friction for requesters and governments, and the hope is that we come out with some sort of consensus recommendation on each of these.
And I think what was happening at the council meetings, there was a lot of discussion and debate, you know, lack of research maybe informing some of that. So, you know, the idea would be that subcommittees would do research and collaborate and then bring that back to the council with more information that wasn't taking up the whole council meeting with back and forth. So I think that was the idea of it. So do we have a motion to create the public education committee?
So moved.
Yeah. Second it. Okay, all those in favor of creating the public education subcommittee?
Aye.
Any opposed? None? Seeing none, we hereby create the public education subcommittee. I will join you on that, Tony. I'm very into training and outreach. And let me know, folks, if you would like to be included in that. And maybe Liz will. I'm guessing she's kind of interested in that, but we can find out from Liz. Yes, Steve?
Sorry, before she left, Ginger had asked for people to volunteer as, if we could say whether they'd be willing to be chairs. You still have that information?
Yeah, so we do have one chair, Liz, on the fees committee. I do not have any volunteers yet for the data committee to be the chair.
I will volunteer.
Okay.
Look at what the Sunshine Committee's done. I figured as much.
I will try to drum up more members for your independence and sustainability subcommittee.
Is Michael on the line? Michael? Wow.
Unmute.
His digital avatar too. Are you allowed to have more than one? You can confirm with him, but he did tell me that.
That he would?
He was willing to do it.
Okay, we'll add him. I can actually assign committees, so.
Well, and quite honestly, I will volunteer for the independence and sustainability one, because I also committed to Steve that I would actively engage in the sustainability part.
Thanks.
And I'd like to volunteer for the data committee.
Okay.
I'm on data.
Okay, any volunteers to be on the public education subcommittee with myself and Tony today? And I can bring it up in the next meeting as well and ask for volunteers. Okay. Stay tuned on that.
I'll volunteer for that one. This is Les.
Thank you, Les. What? Oh, yes. Okay. So we are now back to open public comment. If anyone has any other comments for us today, it looks like Christian has a lot of comments. Do you want to read some of them?
Yeah, sure. Okay. I'm just going to pick the ones that are not supporting each themselves, since they are actually unique. He made a comment when we were discussing whether to proceed immediately or delay. He talked about potentially acting subcommittees pending. I think that's largely been resolved as we've gone forward. He did have an idea of a geographic chapter-like subcommittee. You know, obviously there's representation all over the state. The idea of avoiding an eastern-western divide. And then he's a big fan of the public education part. And that it will be difficult to do sustainability, but.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Christian. We are hearing your comments. Adding them to the record. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion, yes, please.
All in favor of adjournment?
Second, yes, please.
All right.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.